What if I told you that Prince Harry, the boy the world once saw as the loyal spare, the soldier, the cheeky royal who brought laughter to a stiff monarchy, never truly made the decision to walk away? That the choice that shook the foundations of the British crown wasn't his at all? That's the question Tom Bower's bombshell revelations throw straight onto the table. And it's a question that gnaws at the heart of every royal watcher, every monarchist, and every critic of the firm alike. Did Harry actually choose Megxit? Or was he led there, step by step, word by word, by the woman who promised him freedom but delivered controversy? Think about it. A young man who grew up in the shadow of grief, losing his mother in the most tragic of circumstances, thrust into the global spotlight as the grieving son. A boy who once clung to his brother for strength, who served with grit in Afghanistan, who seemed, despite his flaws, to carry a sense of duty. How does that man, one who swore allegiance to Queen and country, suddenly abandon everything for life in California, Netflix deals, and red carpet appearances? Was it really a rebellion, or was it something more sinister, a masterclass in manipulation? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Tom Bower, the investigative bulldog whose books have peeled back the glossy facades of politicians, tycoons, and royals, believes it wasn't a coincidence. According to him, Meghan Markle, from the earliest days of her relationship with Harry, planted the seeds that would eventually grow into the storm of Megxit. She understood his vulnerabilities. She tapped into his trauma. She convinced him, slowly, strategically, that the royal family would never accept her. And once that seed of doubt was watered, it blossomed into full-grown resentment, suspicion, and finally, rupture. But here's the kicker. This isn't just about Harry and Meghan. This is about the monarchy itself. Because if Bower's revelations are true, then Megxit wasn't a spontaneous act of rebellion. It was a calculated dismantling of royal ties, executed not by accident, but by design. And that changes everything. It means the fairy tale love story sold to the public was, in fact, a power play with devastating consequences. Let me ask you, have you ever seen someone gradually distance themselves from family or friends until they're completely isolated, with only one voice guiding them? Isn't it chilling to think that the same thing could have happened inside the House of Windsor, one of the most powerful institutions in the world? Meghan, according to Bower, allegedly made herself the sole confidant, the one person Harry could trust, pushing everyone else, William, Kate, Charles, onto the sidelines. And once she had that loyalty, leaving the palace wasn't a sacrifice. It was the natural conclusion of a plan years in the making. But wait, there's another layer. Because Meghan didn't just push Harry away from his family, she offered him something in return. Freedom, glamour, Hollywood stardom, the chance to control his narrative, the promise that he could be more than just the spare. And who wouldn't be tempted by that? Imagine being told, you don't have to be second place anymore. You can be the star of your own show. For a man who'd lived his whole life in William's shadow, those words would have been intoxicating. Too intoxicating to resist. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Bower suggests that Meghan had Hollywood connections lined up before Megxit even happened. That means the Spotify and Netflix deals weren't born out of a desperate scramble to survive after stepping back. They were part of a pre-planned roadmap. The escape route was mapped. The destination was plotted. All Harry had to do was follow. And follow he did. Doesn't that raise another haunting question? Was Harry truly the author of his own destiny? Or was he just playing a role in Meghan's script? Think about the imagery of it. The once proud soldier, who once commanded troops in combat, being led not onto a battlefield, but into a Netflix boardroom. Doesn't that feel like a betrayal of everything he once stood for? And let's not ignore the contradictions. Meghan once said she didn't know much about the royal family before dating Harry. Yet, we now see a woman who, according to Bower, maneuvered through centuries of protocol and tradition as though she had studied the playbook for years. How does someone go from, I didn't Google my husband, to orchestrating the biggest royal upheaval since Edward VIII abdicated for Wallis Simpson? Is it innocence, or is it calculation? This is why the story matters now. Because as the cracks show in Harry and Meghan's brand, failed Spotify deals, waning Netflix projects, public skepticism, the truth about how this saga began becomes more important than ever. If Bower is right, then Meghan didn't just disrupt the monarchy. She reshaped Harry's identity. She reprogrammed his loyalty. And she ensured that the man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with his brother at Diana's memorial would instead turn his back on the only institution he'd ever known. But let's not forget the emotional toll. Every manipulation story comes with casualties. In this case, the casualties are familial bonds torn apart, the icy rift with William, the heartbreak of Charles watching his son drift away, the lingering pain of a grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who lived long enough to witness the unraveling of her grandson's duty. Was Harry protecting Meghan? Or was Meghan protecting her plan? Now, picture this. Tom Bower, sitting in his study, files spread across the desk, piecing together accounts from insiders, palace aides, Hollywood whispers, royal correspondence. Every scrap of testimony, every pattern of behavior, every unexplained decision. Assembled into a portrait not of Harry the rebel, but of Harry the manipulated. Imagine the weight of that conclusion, that the Duke of Sussex, once beloved for his authenticity, may not have been steering the ship at all, and the timing couldn't be more explosive. The monarchy faces generational change, Charles settling into kingship, William preparing for the throne, and public trust wavering after years of scandals. Against this backdrop, the idea that one outsider could so effectively steer a prince away from the crown is staggering. It's not just a love story gone wrong. It's a national security question, a cultural earthquake, a crack in the armor of an institution that has survived wars, abdications, and revolutions. But here's where I want you to lean in. Because the most chilling part of Bower's account isn't just that Meghan manipulated Harry, it's that he may not even realize it. That, to this day, he believes he chose. That he believes the path was his. Isn't that the deepest form of control? To convince someone that the decisions you made for them were, in fact, their own? And that leaves us here, right on the edge. If Meghan truly masterminded Megxit, if she played the long game from day one, if every confrontation, every whisper, every Hollywood meeting was part of the master plan, then the story of Megxit isn't Harry's story at all. It's Meghan's. Harry was the passenger. Meghan was the driver. But what happens when the driver runs out of road? When the promises of Hollywood glamour begin to fade? When the deals don't deliver and the spotlight starts to dim? What happens to the passenger then? Because as you'll see, the seeds of Megxit weren't sown in 2020. They were planted long before the world had any clue. And the way they grew, through whispers, through promises, through conflicts, changed not only Harry's destiny, but the course of the monarchy itself. What if the story of Megxit didn't begin with a dramatic announcement, a press release, or even a heated argument inside the palace walls? What if it began with a whisper, subtle, quiet, but powerful enough to shift the very foundation of a prince's loyalty? That's where Tom Bower's revelations take us. He claims that Meghan Markle's alleged manipulation of Harry wasn't sudden. It was gradual. It started with planting seeds of doubt, the kind that seem harmless at first but grow into towering forests of suspicion. And once those roots take hold, there's almost no going back. Imagine Harry in the early days of his marriage. He's in love. He's finally found someone who sees him not as the spare, but as a man in his own right. Meghan is glamorous, confident, worldly. She tells him what he's always longed to hear, that he matters, that his voice has been overshadowed for too long. But alongside that adoration comes another message, one whispered in late-night conversations, repeated during moments of vulnerability. They'll never accept me. They'll never accept us. Think about that. If the person you love most, the one you've chosen to build your life with, looks you in the eye and tells you that your family doesn't want her, what would you do? Wouldn't you begin to question everything you've ever believed? Wouldn't you start to see slights and insults in places where, before, there may have been none? This is what Bower suggests Meghan did. She allegedly framed the royal family as an obstacle, not a home. A fortress designed to keep her out, rather than welcome her in. And Harry, with his history of mistrust toward the institution after the loss of Diana, was the perfect soil for those seeds to grow. Remember Harry's long-held resentment of the media and the monarchy's failure to protect his mother? Meghan, according to Bower, knew exactly how to link her own struggles to his deepest scars. Every time she felt slighted, whether it was by protocol, by palace staff, or by the tabloids, she allegedly reminded Harry. This is history repeating itself. They're doing to me what they did to your mother." Can you imagine the emotional punch of those words? For Harry, it wasn't just about Meghan anymore. It was about Diana. It was about vengeance. And here's the clever part. When someone you love insists that they're being targeted, your natural instinct is to defend them. Harry began to see his family through Meghan's lens. Where once he saw duty and tradition, he now saw rejection and hostility. Where once he trusted William and Kate as his closest allies, he began to question their motives. Were they truly supportive, or were they just another extension of the institution Meghan warned him about? The doubts grew. A small seed here. Why didn't Kate reach out to me more? Another seed there. Why did Charles hesitate before approving this idea? Every pause, every hesitation, every awkward smile became evidence in Harry's mind that Meghan had been right all along. And let's not forget the power of isolation. Seeds of doubt don't thrive when too many voices are involved. They grow best when there's only one gardener tending them. Meghan allegedly made herself that sole gardener. She positioned herself as the only one who truly understood Harry. And the more he leaned on her, the less he leaned on his family. It was subtle, but powerful. Have you ever noticed how, in the interviews Harry has given since Megxit, his language often mirrors Meghan's? Phrases like their truth, unconscious bias, lack of support. These aren't the words Harry grew up using. They're the words of someone who has been persuaded, reshaped, even coached to see the world through a different lens. Now, let's pause for a second. What's most striking here isn't that Meghan allegedly convinced Harry his family didn't like her. Many spouses feel tension with in-laws. What's striking is how those doubts became the bedrock for a life-altering decision. If you believe your family doesn't accept your partner, leaving them becomes not just a choice. It becomes a moral obligation. And that's the genius of it. Meghan didn't need to convince Harry to leave outright. She only needed to convince him that staying would mean betraying her. And once that idea took root, everything else followed naturally. Conflicts with staff? Proof that Meghan was under attack. Media scrutiny? Proof the palace didn't protect her. Awkward silences at royal dinners? Proof that she was being frozen out. Every piece of the puzzle fit perfectly because the frame had already been built. But there's a darker irony here. The royal family may not have known what was happening until it was too late. While they were trying to integrate Meghan, perhaps even bending rules to accommodate her, the seeds of doubt ensured that Harry saw every gesture through suspicion. What might have been intended as inclusion was interpreted as rejection. And that's how manipulation works. It doesn't matter what the truth is, it matters how the truth is framed. So, ask yourself, could Harry really have walked away if he hadn't first been convinced that his family had failed him? Could Megxit have happened without those carefully planted whispers of doubt? Or was it inevitable, once the seeds had grown too strong to be uprooted? Because here's the chilling part. Bauer claims Meghan began this process early, very early. As soon as she entered the royal fold, she allegedly began preparing Harry for the possibility that they'd have to leave. And the moment he accepted that possibility, the rest was just a matter of timing. But what if I told you that the seeds of doubt were only the first step? That once Harry was convinced the palace was against them, Meghan dangled something even more irresistible in front of him? Something that promised not just freedom, but power. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the promise of freedom wasn't enough? What if Meghan knew that to pull Harry completely away from the centuries-old grip of the monarchy, she would need to offer him something dazzling, something irresistible, something brighter than the crown itself? That's where the Hollywood temptation comes in. According to Tom Bauer, Meghan didn't simply plant doubts in Harry's mind about the royal family. She allegedly presented him with a seductive alternative, a life of global stardom, unshackled from palace rules, dripping in influence, money, and power. Picture Harry, born into duty, bound by tradition, watching his older brother William groomed for the throne. He's the spare, the backup, the second act in a play where the lead was already cast before he was born. For years, he lived with the shadow of insignificance. And now, along comes Meghan, a woman from Hollywood, confident and ambitious, who tells him that he doesn't have to be the spare anymore. That outside the palace walls, he could be the star of his own story. Doesn't that sound intoxicating? Ask yourself, how many people would trade a rigid royal role? Endless handshakes, scripted speeches, bowing to protocol, for the glamorous promise of Hollywood? Red carpets, movie premieres, high-profile friends with billion-dollar bank accounts, a chance to craft your own brand on your own terms. For Harry, who often felt trapped, this was more than just an idea. It was liberation. But here's the twist. Bauer suggests this wasn't some spontaneous dream. Meghan allegedly had it lined up before Megxit was even a word. She knew the power of Hollywood because it was her world. She had connections with agents, producers, and moguls who were more than happy to take a prince and his actress wife under their wing. Remember, within weeks of stepping back, Netflix and Spotify came knocking. Does that sound like coincidence? Or like a plan that had been laid months, maybe years, in advance? Let's not forget Meghan's own words. In interviews, she hinted at how suffocating royal life felt, how little autonomy she had. Behind the scenes, according to Bauer, she painted Hollywood as the antidote. We can live where we want, say what we want, do the projects we believe in. No palace approvals, no royal traditions. Just us, our voice, our truth. Imagine hearing that when you've spent your life being told what you can't do. Wouldn't that feel like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave? The irony here is thick. Royals are supposed to embody duty, not freedom. Yet, Meghan allegedly flipped that script, making Hollywood seem like the true royal stage. In her framing, the monarchy wasn't prestige, it was a prison. And Hollywood? That was the crown jewel. It was the throne Harry never knew he could have. And then there's the money. Let's be honest, financial independence wasn't just about survival. It was about leverage. Under the monarchy, Harry was always tied to the sovereign grant, always dependent on his father's purse strings. But Meghan allegedly told him that outside the palace walls, they could make more money than any royal ever dreamed of. Hundreds of millions in deals. Complete control over their own empire. No strings attached. Doesn't that sound like freedom, wrapped in dollar signs? But here's where it gets even more calculated. Meghan didn't just tempt Harry with vague dreams. She allegedly connected him with real opportunities, Hollywood producers, streaming executives, media influencers. The deals were lined up so seamlessly that the moment they announced their departure, contracts were ready. Think about that. People don't walk into multi-million-dollar Netflix deals overnight. Those conversations had to be happening long before the stepping back announcement. Now, let's not forget the psychological element. Harry grew up watching his mother, Diana, break free from the monarchy's stranglehold and craft her own identity. He saw how the world adored her outside the palace. Meghan, by holding up Hollywood, wasn't just offering freedom. She was offering Harry the chance to finish Diana's legacy. To be more than the spare. To be a global force in his own right. That's not just temptation. That's destiny, wrapped in emotional appeal. But here's the contradiction, and it's a big one. Meghan once said she didn't marry Harry for fame. Yet, according to Bauer, every step she took pointed toward building a brand, a platform, a global presence that rivaled even the monarchy itself. Can you see the irony? The woman who claimed she wanted a quiet life away from the spotlight allegedly pushed her husband into the brightest, most commercial spotlight imaginable. Freedom from tradition, yes, but not freedom from fame. And let's be real, Hollywood's promises are seductive but dangerous. It's a world built on attention, contracts, and public approval. For a prince used to deference and respect, the reality of chasing ratings and reviews would eventually be jarring. But in those early days, all Harry saw was the glitter. Meghan painted it as paradise. No bowing, no palace staff, no centuries-old protocols, just yachts, premieres, and applause. So here's the question. Was Hollywood truly the dream Harry wanted, or the dream Meghan needed him to believe in? If Harry had been left to his own devices, would he really have traded Sandringham and Balmoral for Montecito and Malibu? Or was he swept up in a fantasy so alluring he couldn't see the trap? Because the Hollywood promise wasn't just about money or fame, it was about power. Power to tell their story. Power to fight back against the institution. Power to build an empire bigger than the monarchy itself. But every promise comes with a price. And as we've seen in the years since Megxit, Hollywood's glitter doesn't always last. Still, in those early conversations, the deal was sealed. Meghan had shown Harry a world beyond the crown, and he was hooked. But temptation alone isn't enough to sever a royal bond. There had to be something more, something darker. And that's where the clashes began. Because Meghan didn't just promise Harry a better life. According to Bauer, she allegedly created the proof that he needed saving. And what came next would test Harry's loyalty like never before. What if the very walls of the palace weren't just cold stone, but a stage set for battles carefully orchestrated to prove a point? That's the claim Tom Bauer puts forward, that Meghan Markle didn't merely endure clashes with palace staff, but, in many cases, staged them. And those clashes weren't just accidental sparks. They were deliberate fires designed to show Harry that his wife was under attack, and that he was her only defender. Let's rewind. In the beginning, Meghan was supposed to be the modernizing force, the breath of fresh air for the royal family. A biracial American actress marrying into the House of Windsor. It was a fairy tale for the headlines, a PR dream. But behind those smiling photo calls, things were fracturing. Meghan reportedly clashed with aides, assistants, and courtiers almost immediately. And here's where Bauer's narrative bites. These clashes weren't just disagreements. They were ammunition. Think about it. If Meghan wanted Harry to see the monarchy as hostile, what better way than to create situations where she looked victimized? Every disagreement with staff, every critique of her behavior or wardrobe could be spun into a narrative. They're targeting me, Harry. They don't respect me. They'll never accept me. And Harry, already primed with those seeds of doubt, saw what she wanted him to see. His wife under siege. Now, let's look at the infamous tears over the bridesmaid dresses story. Remember how Meghan and Kate's alleged clash before the royal wedding became tabloid fodder? Meghan later claimed in the Oprah interview that it was Kate who made her cry, not the other way around. But according to palace insiders, that confrontation was more complex. To Harry, however, it was simple. His bride was being mistreated by his own family. Once again, Meghan was the victim, and he, the protector. And what about the aides? Stories leaked of Meghan's difficult Duchess reputation, with reports of staff reduced to tears, emails sent at dawn, rules bent or broken. Was Meghan really just difficult to work with? Or, as Bauer hints, were these moments orchestrated to highlight how unsupportive the palace was? After all, if staff pushed back on Meghan's demands, it wasn't because of protocol, it was because they didn't respect her. That's how Harry was encouraged to interpret it. Have you ever noticed how Harry began using words like trapped and toxic when describing the institution? That's not just a man echoing his own frustrations. That's a man whose perspective has been reframed. Every staff disagreement became proof of systemic hostility. Every protocol became oppression. Every hesitation by the palace was twisted into rejection. And think about the optics. Meghan, a glamorous outsider, clashing with career courtiers who had served the crown for decades. To Harry, who had always been suspicious of the men in gray suits, it was the perfect storm. Meghan wasn't fighting just for herself. She was fighting against the very people he already mistrusted. How could he not take her side? Now let's step back. Was Meghan truly being victimized? Or was she playing a bigger game? If you want someone to leave a family as powerful as the Windsors, you need more than sweet promises of freedom. You need to create an environment so toxic, so hostile, that leaving feels like the only rational choice. And that's exactly what Bauer suggests Meghan did. By escalating clashes with staff, she created a narrative Harry couldn't ignore. He wasn't just choosing between family and freedom. He was choosing between defending his wife or abandoning her to the wolves. And here's where it gets even more manipulative. Bauer claims Meghan would replay these clashes to Harry, retelling the stories with herself as the wounded victim and the palace as the cruel aggressor. Can you picture it? Harry coming home after a long day of duties, Meghan tearfully recounting how an aide dismissed her ideas, how a courtier rolled their eyes, how Kate supposedly refused to apologize. Each story pulling him further away from his family, closer into her orbit. It's the classic us versus them strategy. By painting the palace as the enemy, Meghan positioned herself as Harry's only true ally. And once he believed that, every argument with William, every hesitation from Charles, every cold glance from the courtiers only confirmed what Meghan had told him all along. And the more Harry defended her, the more isolated he became. Have you ever been in a situation where you defended someone so fiercely that you ended up alienating everyone else around you? That's where Harry found himself. Each clash wasn't just a disagreement. It was another brick in the wall separating him from his family. The brilliance of it, if we can call it that, was in how the clashes escalated. They started small, arguments over staff schedules, protocol demands. But they grew into bigger storms, public feuds, media leaks, palace sources whispering about Meghan's behavior. And at every stage, Meghan could point to the chaos and say, "See, Harry? This is why we can't stay. This is why we have to leave." Doesn't it all feel too perfectly aligned? Too neatly orchestrated? Almost as if the conflicts weren't just unfortunate mishaps, but stepping stones leading to a predetermined exit. And here's the haunting question. Would Harry ever have agreed to leave without these clashes? Without the sense that his wife was under constant attack? Without the need to play the hero? Or was that the very point? To build a battlefield where Harry's only winning move was to walk away from the palace? Because once you see every staff member as an enemy, every family member as cold, and every tradition as oppressive, staying no longer feels like loyalty. It feels like betrayal. And that's exactly where Harry found himself. But this was only the beginning. The clashes with staff were just one tactic. There was a bigger, more devastating strategy at play. Because once the palace was cast as the enemy, Meghan allegedly took it one step further. She began cutting Harry off from the very people who might have pulled him back. And what came next would leave Harry more isolated than ever before. And no one, not even William or Charles, could break through. What if the most powerful move wasn't simply clashing with staff or challenging palace protocol, but cutting Harry off from the people who had been his anchors his entire life? Tom Bower argues that Meghan's strategy went deeper than confrontations. It was about isolation. If you want to control someone completely, you don't just plant seeds of doubt. You make sure no one else can water them with a different perspective. And that's exactly what Meghan allegedly did. Let's look at the timeline. Before Meghan, Harry's closest confidants were obvious. William, his brother-in-arms and partner in grief. Kate, who had been like a sister since her engagement to William. And Charles, his father, who, despite tensions, provided financial support and guidance. Even Queen Elizabeth herself played a stabilizing role. These weren't just family members, they were Harry's lifeline. But gradually, one by one, those ties frayed. And who was left standing as his sole ally? Meghan. Have you noticed how, in nearly every major interview since Megxit, Harry talks about a lack of support? He describes William and Charles as cold, distant, unwilling to help. That didn't happen overnight. Bower suggests it was carefully crafted, an isolation strategy where Meghan positioned herself as the only person Harry could trust. Think about William and Harry's relationship. They had been inseparable, walking behind Diana's coffin, serving in the military, launching joint charities. They were the royal brothers who had each other's backs through everything. But once Meghan entered the picture, cracks began to appear. Reports of tension between Kate and Meghan over staff behavior, rumors of William warning Harry to slow down with the relationship, whispers that William questioned Meghan's intentions. To Harry, those weren't just warnings, they were betrayals. And Meghan allegedly fueled that perception. See, your own brother doesn't support us. And what about Charles? The father who walked Meghan down the aisle when her own father couldn't attend. Yet, over time, Harry painted Charles as emotionally unavailable, financially controlling, and dismissive of their struggles. Was Charles really pulling away, or was Harry being convinced that his father's love was conditional? Again, Meghan's alleged framing mattered more than reality. Every delayed phone call, every stiff upper lip, every moment Charles acted like a monarch instead of a dad became evidence that he didn't care. Even Kate, once adored by Harry, became part of the wedge. She went from being a sister figure to being cast as cold, complicit, even cruel. That famous moment when Meghan claimed Kate made her cry over the bridesmaid dresses wasn't just about wedding stress. It was ammunition, a way of saying, she'll never accept me. And if she doesn't accept me, then she doesn't truly accept you either. Here's the brilliance and the tragedy of isolation. It doesn't always look like cutting ties directly. Sometimes it's subtle. A whispered comment here. A pointed question there. Why do they treat me differently? Why don't they defend us? Why are they silent when the press attacks? Over time, those whispers add up. They become the soundtrack in your head. And before you know it, you're questioning the motives of the people you once trusted most. Now, imagine Harry at family gatherings after Meghan came into the fold. Every time William looked concerned, it was framed as disapproval. Every time Kate seemed reserved, it was framed as judgment. Every time Charles hesitated, it was framed as rejection. Meghan allegedly turned normal family dynamics into proof of hostility. And Harry, desperate to protect his wife, bought into it. Isolation isn't just about pulling someone away physically. It's about creating emotional distance. And once Harry began to doubt his family's loyalty, he stopped confiding in them. He stopped trusting them. He stopped seeking their advice. Instead, he turned inward toward Meghan. She became his sounding board, his comfort, his strategist. And the more he leaned on her, the less he needed anyone else. Have you ever been in a relationship where the other person slowly becomes your entire world? Where your friends fade into the background and your family's opinions suddenly feel irrelevant? That's what Bauer suggests happened here. Harry's world shrank until it revolved entirely around Meghan. And once that happened, leaving the monarchy wasn't just an option, it was inevitable. But there's another chilling angle. Isolation didn't just distance Harry from his family. It also cut him off from his friends. Longtime companions from Eton, his army brothers, even members of his old party circle. Many drifted away. Why? Because Meghan allegedly didn't approve of them. They represented the old Harry, the one tied to tradition, duty, and camaraderie outside her orbit. And so, one by one, they disappeared. By the time the decision to step back was announced, Harry wasn't standing with a circle of advisors weighing the pros and cons. He was standing alone, with Meghan. And when the only voice in your ear is telling you the palace is the enemy, Hollywood is the escape, and your family has failed you, what choice do you really think you'll make? And here's the devastating consequence. Isolation made reconciliation nearly impossible. Even when William reportedly reached out, even when Charles expressed concern, Harry saw their efforts through Meghan's framing. He didn't hear, "We love you." He heard, "We don't support her." And for Harry, rejecting Meghan would have felt like betraying the only person left on his side. So, ask yourself, was Megxit truly a mutual decision? Or was it the inevitable outcome of an isolation strategy that left Harry with only one road to walk, the road away from the monarchy? Because once the walls of Windsor were painted as hostile, and the voices of William, Kate, and Charles were silenced by suspicion, Meghan didn't just become Harry's wife. She became his world. And in that world, leaving the firm wasn't rebellion, it was survival. But what if I told you that Meghan's plan didn't end with pulling Harry away from his family? That once he was isolated, the next move was already waiting, carefully mapped out, with Hollywood contracts ready to go? And what came next would prove that Megxit wasn't a leap into the unknown. It was an escape route Meghan had drawn long before anyone realized. What if I told you that Megxit wasn't a desperate, last-minute gamble, but a carefully drawn blueprint? Tom Bauer argues that Meghan didn't just nudge Harry away from the palace. She already had the escape route charted, the deals prepared, and the Hollywood doors waiting wide open. The so-called master escape plan wasn't conceived in the chaos of 2020. It was the endgame from the very start. Think about the speed. Within weeks of announcing their step back, Harry and Meghan had million-dollar contracts lined up. Netflix, Spotify, speaking tours, book deals, foundations with sleek branding. Do you really believe all of that happened overnight? Or does it look like conversations, negotiations, and careful positioning had been taking place long before the world ever heard the word Megxit? Consider this. Meghan already had a foothold in Hollywood. Agents, PR experts, entertainment lawyers, these weren't new faces to her. They were her old world, the world she never truly left behind when she entered the royal one. While Harry was navigating the rigid corridors of Kensington Palace, Meghan was reportedly cultivating contacts in California, keeping lines open with executives who could transform a royal exit into a Hollywood entrance. And here's the irony. When Meghan and Harry announced they wanted to be financially independent, it sounded noble. It sounded like a rejection of taxpayer funding. But Bauer suggests it was less about independence and more about repositioning. Independence from the palace meant dependence on Hollywood. The sovereign grant would no longer pay the bills, but multi-million-dollar contracts would. Doesn't it make you wonder if independence was just a buzzword masking a far more calculated move? Let's trace the timeline. In late 2019, as tensions with the palace peaked, Harry and Meghan spent time in Canada, away from royal duties. Insiders whispered that this wasn't just a break. It was reconnaissance. Meghan was reportedly in talks with media executives, exploring branding opportunities, laying the groundwork for the next phase of their lives. By the time they returned to the UK in early 2020, the decision was already made. The palace thought negotiations were still on the table, but in Meghan's mind, the bridge had already been burned. Have you ever noticed how, in interviews, Meghan frames their exit as survival? Yet, almost immediately, they were living in Tyler Perry's mansion, signing with high-powered agents, securing global contracts. Survival? Or execution of a plan long in motion? And let's not ignore the symbolism. Netflix wasn't just a paycheck. It was a platform, the biggest in the world, to control the narrative. Meghan and Harry didn't want to step away quietly. They wanted a stage. And Hollywood was that stage. Documentaries, interviews, projects branded with their names. It wasn't retreat, it was reinvention. They weren't abandoning royalty. They were replacing it with a new kind of crown, the crown of celebrity influence. Now, here's the haunting question. Was Harry ever truly briefed on the full plan? Did he know, step by step, that leaving meant becoming a brand, a commodity, a business? Or was he swept along by Meghan's assurances that this was freedom, that this was their shot at true independence? Imagine Harry thinking they were simply stepping away for peace and quiet, while Meghan had mapped a path to red carpets, Netflix boardrooms, and Oprah's garden. And think about how perfectly it was executed. First, the seeds of doubt, convincing Harry the palace was against them. Then, the Hollywood temptation, painting life outside the firm as glamorous and free. Then, the clashes with staff, making the palace environment intolerable. Then, isolation, cutting Harry off from every alternative voice. By the time the master plan was unveiled, Harry had nowhere else to turn. It wasn't just persuasion, it was strategy. Now, here's a detail people often forget. When the Queen held that crisis summit at Sandringham in January 2020, the palace was blindsided by the speed of Harry and Meghan's announcement. Why? Because Meghan allegedly pushed for a preemptive strike, dropping the news on Instagram before the royals had agreed on terms. That wasn't reckless. That was control. By going public first, Meghan ensured the palace would always be reacting, never leading. Doesn't that sound like someone who already knew her next move? And the contracts? Spotify, Netflix, Penguin Random House. All massive deals, all requiring time, negotiation, and planning. How could those doors open so quickly if Meghan hadn't been knocking on them long before? But here's where it gets darker. Was this really Harry's plan at all? Or was he simply carried along, believing it was mutual, when in reality the wheels had been turning with or without him? Meghan had the contacts, the vision, the ambition. Harry had the name, the title, the royal blood. Together, they were a package. But separate? Could Harry have orchestrated such a leap alone? And now, the cracks are showing. Spotify canceled. Netflix reportedly skeptical about future projects. Public interest waning. Was Meghan's master escape plan brilliant in its execution, but flawed in its sustainability? Did she win the short game, but risk the long one? Because here's the chilling possibility. If Meghan truly orchestrated the exit, then Harry's role was never strategist, it was pawn. The plan needed his name, his title, his connection to Diana. But once the contracts are signed and the brand is built, what happens if Harry realizes he was never the architect? What happens when the master escape plan feels more like entrapment? Ask yourself, could Megxit ever have happened without a plan? Without the foresight of contracts, the lure of Hollywood, the precision of timing? Or was the whole saga less a rebellion and more a heist, pulled off by someone who knew exactly what she wanted from day one? Because if Bauer is right, then Harry didn't just leave the monarchy. He walked straight into Meghan's master plan. And once you see that, you realize freedom wasn't the destination. Control was. But what happens when the prince who thought he was escaping realizes he's trapped in a new kind of cage? A cage built not of duty, but of deals and expectations. And what came next would change Harry himself, not just his role, but his entire identity. What if the greatest casualty of Megxit wasn't the monarchy's reputation, nor even the fractured family bonds, but Harry himself? What if the boy who once embodied rebellion with a smile, who served in combat zones, who gave his life to causes like Invictus, was transformed into someone unrecognizable, not by accident, but by design? That's the chilling possibility Tom Bauer raises when he describes Harry's transformation under Meghan's influence. Let's set the scene. Before Meghan, Harry was known as the People's Prince. He was rough around the edges, yes, scandals in Vegas, questionable costume choices, and his notorious party days. But beneath the antics, he was deeply relatable. He was the royal who hugged children, who laughed at himself, who carried the ghost of Diana in a way that made people forgive his mistakes. He was flawed, but he was real. People loved him for it. Now fast forward to today. The same Harry appears on television reading scripted lines about our truth. He sits stiffly in Netflix documentaries, repeating carefully curated phrases. He lashes out at his family in interviews, books, and speeches, often sounding more like a spokesperson than a man speaking freely. Have you noticed the change in his language? The shift from cheeky banter to rehearsed talking points? That's not coincidence. That's transformation. And here's where Bauer's argument cuts deep. Meghan allegedly didn't just offer Harry freedom. She reshaped his identity. She turned him from soldier and prince into brand ambassador, from protector of the monarchy into critic of it. Some call it growth. Others call it manipulation. But either way, the Harry we see now is not the Harry the world once knew. Let's talk specifics. Pre-Meghan Harry was fiercely loyal to William. They were brothers in arms, united by grief and duty. Post-Meghan Harry describes William as cold, controlling, even violent. Pre-Meghan Harry admired his grandmother's devotion to the crown. Post-Meghan Harry portrays the monarchy as a trap. Pre-Meghan Harry accepted his role as the spare, joking about it even. Post-Meghan Harry titles his memoir Spare, a 400-page cry of resentment. How does someone change so completely, so quickly? Bauer suggests it wasn't organic. Meghan allegedly reframed Harry's entire worldview. She took his old wounds, the death of Diana, the resentment of the press, the feeling of being overshadowed, and magnified them. She made those wounds central to his identity, until they defined him more than his duty ever could. Ask yourself, when Harry now speaks about trauma, bias, and systemic failure, whose voice do you hear? Is it Harry's? Or is it Meghan's, filtered through Harry's lips? Because the Harry we knew never spoke in academic jargon about unconscious bias. He spoke from the gut. He was emotional, raw, imperfect. Now, he sounds polished, careful, coached. Doesn't that sound less like growth and more like scripting? But the transformation wasn't just in words, it was in actions. Remember the old Harry who proudly wore his uniform, who risked his life in Afghanistan. Contrast that with the Harry who now sues newspapers, who signs media deals, who sits in Montecito mansions. The fighter became the litigant. The soldier became the celebrity. The prince who once said he didn't want to be in the spotlight now monetizes it. That's not just change, that's inversion. And the saddest part? You can see flashes of the old Harry, trapped inside. In some interviews, when Meghan speaks for him, his body language screams discomfort. He looks down. He fidgets. He seems hesitant, as if he wants to say something else, but doesn't dare. It's as though the man who once joked with soldiers in muddy boots now walks on eggshells in his own life. Let's not forget the public perception. Before Meghan, Harry was one of the most popular royals, sometimes even outranking the Queen in polls. After Meghan, his popularity plummeted. His transformation alienated the very people who once adored him. That kind of shift doesn't happen without influence. It doesn't happen without someone rewriting the narrative. And here's the cruel twist. Harry believes he's finally free, finally himself. But look closely. Has he truly broken free from control, or has he simply traded one system for another? In the palace, he was bound by tradition. In Montecito, he's bound by contracts, media obligations, and the expectations of the brand he and Meghan built. The cage is new, but the bars are still there. Bauer suggests that this transformation wasn't accidental, it was strategic. A weakened, resentful, isolated Harry was easier to mold. Once he stopped seeing himself as the loyal spare and started seeing himself as the victim, Meghan could redirect his energy away from duty and into the empire they were building together. And he embraced it, because believing he was choosing his own path was part of the transformation itself. But let's ask the haunting question. What happens when Harry wakes up? What happens if, years from now, he looks in the mirror and realizes he doesn't recognize the man staring back? That he traded his family, his duty, and even his own identity for a version of himself that wasn't truly his? Will he feel empowered or betrayed? Because here's the bitter truth. Transformations can be liberating, but they can also be prisons. And Harry's transformation, under Meghan's alleged guidance, may be both. He is no longer the soldier prince, but is he really free? Or has he simply become the most high-profile pawn in Meghan's master plan? And that leads us to the next stage. If Harry's transformation was step 1 in Meghan's war against the monarchy, then step 2 was even more dangerous. Because Meghan wasn't just changing Harry, she was challenging the entire institution. And what came next would erupt into open conflict, one that would pit Meghan against the most powerful institution in Britain, the crown itself. What happens when a single woman takes on a 1,000-year-old institution? That's the battle Tom Bower paints in stark colors. Meghan Markle, armed with charisma, ambition, and grievance, squaring off against the British monarchy, the very system she married into. But was it really a battle for fairness, or was it a calculated war, waged to justify the escape plan already in motion? From the outside, Meghan's early months as a royal looked like a honeymoon. Crowds cheered. Headlines praised the breath of fresh air. The palace rolled out the red carpet, literally, for the American actress who had captured a prince. But behind the palace gates, tensions were building. Meghan wasn't just another duchess. She was a disruptor. She questioned rules, broke protocol, and clashed with courtiers who had spent decades preserving tradition. Now, here's the question. Was this genuine culture clash, or was it strategy? Bower suggests Meghan didn't simply stumble into conflict. She leaned into it. Every confrontation became a case study in victimhood. Every raised eyebrow from a courtier, every whispered critique, every tabloid headline was framed as proof that the institution was against her. And Harry? He was caught in the middle. Imagine your wife telling you, night after night, that the people you grew up trusting are plotting against her, that they don't respect her, that they want her silenced. What would you do? If you're Harry, haunted by Diana's treatment, you believe her. And once he believed her, Meghan had the perfect ally in her war against the monarchy. Let's not sugarcoat it. Meghan knew how to fight. Hollywood had trained her well. In that world, image is power and narrative is survival. She understood branding better than any palace official, and she weaponized it. Instead of quietly adapting to royal life, she and Harry launched Sussex Royal, complete with Instagram branding, modern messaging, and glossy images that rivaled Kensington Palace itself. Doesn't that look less like assimilation and more like competition? Now, think about the way Meghan framed her grievances. It wasn't just the family. It was the institution, a faceless, monolithic machine designed to crush individuality. By depersonalizing the monarchy, she wasn't just arguing with William, Charles, or Elizabeth. She was battling an empire. That framing made her story bigger, more dramatic, more sellable. It wasn't Meghan versus in-laws. It was Meghan versus the crown. Which story do you think plays better in Oprah's garden or in a Netflix boardroom? But here's the contradiction that Bower seizes on. Meghan said she wanted to serve, to be part of the royal family. Yet, her actions often undercut the very system she claimed to respect. Turning up to events without protocol, giving speeches that veered off script, courting celebrity friends like George Clooney and Oprah. Was she really trying to fit in, or was she building a rival power base all along? And then came the leaks. Negative stories in the press about staff reduced to tears, about Hurricane Meghan blowing through palace corridors. Meghan pointed the finger at the firm, accusing them of planting stories to discredit her. The palace, bound by never complain, never explain, stayed silent. And silence, of course, looked like guilt. Meghan turned the institution's greatest strength, stoic restraint, into her weapon. Now, let's talk about the Oprah interview. That wasn't just a tell-all. That was a declaration of war. Racism allegations, claims of indifference to mental health, accusations of coldness from Kate and Charles. Meghan didn't just critique the monarchy, she detonated a bomb beneath it, in front of millions worldwide. And Harry sat beside her, nodding, confirming, backing her up. It was the moment Meghan versus the institution became global theater. But was it all true? Or was it narrative warfare, designed to cement their victimhood and justify their exit? Bauer claims much of it was exaggerated, one-sided, or unverified. But in the court of public opinion, perception is reality. Meghan knew that. And in that moment, the monarchy looked less like an ancient institution and more like a villain in her story. Ask yourself, how do you fight a monarchy that thrives on silence? You don't. You make sure the world fights it for you. That's what Meghan did. By going public, by framing herself as Diana 2.0, she ensured that millions of viewers worldwide would see her as the heroine and the crown as the antagonist. It was brilliant. It was brutal. And it worked, at least in the short term. But here's the chilling part. Once you declare war on an institution like the monarchy, there's no going back. Bridges are burned. Doors are closed. Reconciliation becomes nearly impossible. Harry and Meghan weren't just stepping back. They were marching into open battle. And for Harry, that meant no safe return. He wasn't just leaving home. He was destroying it. And yet, the war was far from over. Because the Oprah interview wasn't the climax. It was the opening salvo. The real explosion was still to come. Because when Meghan and Harry decided to go nuclear, they weren't just speaking their truth. They were rewriting history. They were reshaping the monarchy's legacy in their own words. And the shockwaves from that moment would reverberate across the world. But what came next would make everything before look like a prelude. The next move wasn't whispers behind palace doors. It was a full-scale detonation, broadcast on primetime television. What if I told you that the Oprah interview wasn't just a tell-all, but a nuclear strike carefully timed and strategically delivered? That moment, 2 hours in Oprah's Rose Garden, wasn't simply Meghan and Harry airing grievances. It was the aftershock of everything Tom Bauer claims had been building for years. The doubts planted, the promises of Hollywood, the clashes with staff, the isolation, the escape plan. And then, boom. The Oprah interview made it global. Let's rewind. By the time Meghan and Harry sat down with Oprah in March 2021, they had already left the UK, already cut ties with the firm, already signed Hollywood deals. But they needed one thing more than money: legitimacy. They needed the world to understand, or rather, to believe, that their departure wasn't selfish, that it wasn't premeditated, that it wasn't part of Meghan's alleged master plan. They needed the world to see them as victims. And who better than Oprah, the queen of confessional television, to deliver that message? Do you remember the imagery? The lush garden, the California sun, Meghan in that black Armani dress, a lotus motif embroidered across her chest, symbolizing rebirth, purity, resilience. Harry sitting beside her, solemn and subdued. Oprah leaning in, asking the questions the world was dying to hear. This wasn't just an interview. It was theater, a production, a stage where the script had already been rehearsed, polished, perfected. And what revelations came out? Meghan claimed she had suicidal thoughts. She alleged palace officials refused her help. She suggested racism in the highest ranks of the monarchy, with concerns voiced about Archie's skin color. She described Kate making her cry. She framed the crown as cold, indifferent, even cruel. Each statement was a dagger aimed at the institution's heart. Harry backed her up, describing his family as trapped in the system, admitting his father stopped taking his calls, painting William as distant, cold. The once golden brothers, the sons of Diana, were now adversaries on opposite sides of a global debate. And the reaction? Explosive. Overnight, Meghan and Harry went from runaway royals to martyrs of a rigid, archaic monarchy. Hashtags trended worldwide. Media outlets split into camps: Team Sussex or Team Crown. Politicians weighed in. Celebrities rallied behind Meghan. Oprah's garden interview didn't just tell a story. It reframed the monarchy itself as outdated, racist, oppressive. But here's the twist Tom Bauer insists on. How much of it was true? How much was exaggerated? How much was strategically framed? Remember Meghan's claim that Archie was denied a title because of racism? Fact-checkers later revealed that under royal protocol, great-grandchildren of the monarch don't automatically receive titles unless they're in the direct line. That wasn't racism. That was centuries-old rules. Yet, in the Oprah interview, it played as discrimination. Or Meghan's claim that palace officials silenced her when she was struggling with mental health. The palace stayed silent, bound by never complain, never explain. But Meghan's narrative went unchecked, echoing Diana's own complaints of isolation. Coincidence, or carefully designed echo? And here's what's even more fascinating. That interview wasn't just about telling their side. It was about controlling the narrative. Meghan and Harry had just signed with Netflix. They were launching Archwell. They were selling books, podcasts, documentaries. What better way to cement their brand as truth-tellers, as underdogs, as survivors, than by putting the monarchy itself on trial in Oprah's backyard? But let's be real. That moment also burned bridges forever. Once you accuse your in-laws of racism on international television, can you ever sit down at Christmas dinner again? Once you tell Oprah your father stopped taking your calls, can you ever expect reconciliation? The Oprah aftershock didn't just shake public opinion. It made Harry's isolation permanent. Have you noticed how Harry spoke in that interview compared to his earlier life? The language wasn't his. Words like institution, trapped, silenced, those aren't the cheeky, plain-spoken Harry the world knew. That's the voice of a man who has been reframed, repackaged, coached. It was Meghan's narrative, with Harry nodding along. His transformation was complete. And here's the bitter irony. The Oprah interview gave them short-term victory, but long-term damage. Yes, they won sympathy. Yes, they dominated headlines. Yes, their Netflix and Spotify deals soared in value. But slowly, cracks began to show. Fact-checkers poked holes. The public grew skeptical. Allies questioned their credibility. Even Oprah later distanced herself, saying, "You get to make your own truth." Notice that phrasing? Your truth, not the truth. So ask yourself, was the Oprah interview a brave confession? Or was it the crescendo of Meghan's master plan? The moment she and Harry cemented themselves as global celebrities by blowing up the very institution that made Harry who he was? Because one thing is undeniable, the aftershock was global. For weeks, the monarchy scrambled. Buckingham Palace issued a rare, terse statement. Recollections may vary. That single line, cold, understated, stood in stark contrast to Meghan's explosive claims. And in that contrast, the world saw two competing realities, silence versus spectacle. But which lasts longer, silence or spectacle? The aftershock of Oprah's interview gave Meghan and Harry everything they wanted in the moment. But the damage to Harry's family ties, his public image, and even their own credibility was just beginning. And then came Tom Bower, the man who gathered testimonies, pieced together contradictions, and claimed that Meghan's truth wasn't the truth at all. His revelations would cut deeper than Oprah's questions ever could. Because if Oprah was the explosion, then Bower's evidence was the fallout. And what he exposed next would change how the world saw Megxit forever. What if the biggest twist in this saga wasn't Meghan and Harry's dramatic exit, nor even their explosive Oprah interview, but the quiet, relentless digging of one man, Tom Bower? For years, Bower has built a reputation as the scourge of the powerful, the man who rips away polished veneers and exposes the rot beneath. And when he turned his sights on Meghan Markle, the results were nothing short of devastating. His book wasn't gossip. It wasn't speculation. It was a dossier of evidence, testimonies, and contradictions that painted Megxit not as Harry's rebellion, but as Meghan's orchestration. Let's break this down. Bower's method is simple but brutal. He interviews everyone. Friends, ex-friends, aides, enemies, neighbors, colleagues, classmates. People Meghan would rather the world forget. People Harry might not even know existed. And what emerged from his investigation was a mosaic, each piece small, but together forming a picture of intent, manipulation, and strategy. First, Bower exposed Meghan's alleged pattern of controlling relationships long before Harry. Ex-boyfriends, former friends, even family members like Thomas Markle Sr. and Samantha Markle all described a similar arc. Warmth, charm, intimacy, followed by distance, coldness, and a ruthless cutting off once they no longer served her goals. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar to what happened with Harry's ties to William, Kate, and Charles? The pattern repeated, only this time, the stakes were royal. Then came the Hollywood connections. Bower dug into Meghan's networking long before Megxit. He revealed alleged meetings with agents, PR strategists, and media executives while she was still a working royal. Whispered conversations in Beverly Hills, strategic dinners, quiet phone calls. These weren't idle chats. They were laying groundwork. So when the exit happened, Netflix and Spotify weren't surprises. They were inevitabilities. Meghan hadn't jumped. She'd built the landing pad. But the most damning revelation? According to Bauer, Harry never truly made the decision. He believed he was choosing freedom. But in reality, he was walking a path Meghan had drawn. Every doubt, every clash, every isolation, every us against them whisper was part of a map that led to Montecito. Meghan, not Harry, was the architect of Megxit. And here's where it gets chilling. Bauer didn't just rely on Meghan's critics. He combed through Meghan and Harry's own words. Interviews, speeches, even court filings. And what he found was contradiction after contradiction. Remember Meghan's claim in the Oprah interview that she and Harry had a secret backyard wedding days before the official ceremony? The Archbishop of Canterbury later flatly denied it. A contradiction.